The model that I chose to utilize in assignment 4 in developing a teaching unit, I chose to use the backward design model. I think it allowed me to focus first on the desired learnings that the student needed to know and plan appropriate teaching and learning around the desired goals. And for this assignment, I'm going to discuss the revisions that I would make to my teaching unit, and so I've included that on the screen so I can take you through that. The first question asks, do the tasks yield appropriate evidence of identified understandings? I do feel that the task yielded appropriate evidence of identified understandings. The tasks that I wanted the students to, or that I focused on in the teaching unit, where the students must be able to obtain an appropriate patient history prior to the procedure, and the students must perform venipuncture. And the students must know the proper questions to ask patients in order to obtain an adequate patient history. And the students must also know the correct steps in the venipuncture process in order to successfully start an IV on the patient. I think those tasks that we focused on throughout did identify or did show appropriate evidence and of the identified understandings. In my teaching unit, I had them actually create a Google document with the patient history questions, and so they actually had to create a Google document with that was their own patient history form. And so after they had learned what was needed to be included in a patient history questionnaire, then they had to create their own. And so I think that was a good evidence that they understood what needed to be included in that, and that they actually carried that out. They also prepared a post-procedure instruction guide, and so that again was evidence that they needed to understand that in order to be able to do that assignment. They identified the steps in venipuncture, what supplies are needed, and also the technique, and carried that out. And so they had to, that was a psychomotor activity that they actually had to perform the venipuncture technique. And so in that, it's definitely evidence of understanding that they understood that and to be able to carry that out. Do the task involve a complex, real-world, authentic application of the identified knowledge, skill, and understanding? These tasks do involve a complex, real-world application. The identified knowledge, skill, and understanding was actually able to be carried out in the psychomotor activity, and these are real-world applications. When we perform a CT exam, we have to acquire patient history, so we have to ask the patient questions about their medical, surgery, cancer, any history. We have to ask the patients questions about their allergies for contrast consent, and then perform the venipuncture technique to administer contrast media. So definitely real life applications. Are a variety of appropriate assessment formats used to provide additional evidence of learning? I did try to incorporate several different formative and summative assessment techniques. Different formative assessment techniques I utilized were the creation of the Google document, having them actually carry that out, performing the venipuncture technique. And then the students had to, they watched videos of venipuncture techniques. They watched a demonstration of the venipuncture supplies, explanation of the angiocatheter, and real-time demonstration of proper use. They got to role play with a partner, asking the questions for contrast consent and for patient history. And then I used Kahoot as another form of formative assessment to test their prior knowledge of patient assessment, obtaining patient history, and venipuncture. That helped me identify the goals that I needed to focus more on for the unit. So those were the different formative assessments that I utilized. Summative assessments were an in-class unit exam at the end of the unit that covered all of the material that was involved in the unit. And so that was my summative assessment. And then are students given the opportunity to self-assess and reflect on their learning and performance? After each activity, we did debrief and talk about them, so they were able to kind of reflect and make any adjustments to see how much they learned. You know, if they did well on the quizzes, then they were grasping the concepts. Maybe if they didn't, they identified the areas that they needed to focus on, and we needed to focus more on a class. Revisions that I would make to the unit were maybe to find a few more YouTube videos to utilize, and then also I would use tables instead of the patient desk for the venipuncture technique. I think that would help them feel more comfortable. So those are my revisions that I would make.